That's a big question.
Okay.
We don't build in landscapes necessarily by choice. So the work we get is the work we get. We started our practice with a house that I'll talk about this evening, two houses, and they were in a very particular landscape which had kind of historical significance in Ireland. And it was a very difficult place to make something. And I think by virtue of us having done that, somehow then we get the work of making buildings in very difficult places, which is not something you might want in practice. Having said that, strangely, the Irish landscape traditionally is extraordinarily, I suppose, dense in a way. It's used. It's a man-made landscape for the most part. So actually, in a lot of cases, both in its physical characteristics and then also in terms of the legislation, which is quite controlled, it's very much like building in the city. So this house I will talk about, it's actually almost a terraced house, even though there's nothing around it, because we have restrictions either side and we have the context of the physical land that we're in. So we find that very interesting, that actually the context isn't always the physical one, the romantic landscape. It's something quite different. We enjoy architecture in all its places. Do we prefer the landscape? I mean, I'm from an urban situation. I'm from the city. And actually, to be quite frank, I don't really understand the culture of living on the land like Andrew, who I work with, does. So in one sense, it's exciting to me because I'm learning about a different way of engaging with the kind of built landscape around you. Andrew is much more familiar with that culture, so I think he has an insight that's far greater than my own in terms of the kind of social and communal and cultural baggage that goes with that, which is quite profound in Ireland, I think, as it is here. We started our practice maybe 4 years after we left college, and I'm not sure we really meant to start a practice. It just happened, slightly by accident. And I think we use different forms of representation to begin to describe the ambition of the work we might make. So we understand that the way you make the work is inextricably linked to the work that you will make. So for example, again, I'll talk about it today in the talk, but on this first job, we made a very large model. And actually, it was made for the planners, for, to get I don't know what you call them here, I presume you call them planners, no? Yeah. To get your grant of permission to build. And we had gone to them previously with many drawings, and they had said, no, it's too much, this is too sensitive a place, and then we made this model, and it filled the entire table. And actually, the meeting kind of took place in the model. And to us, that was a real lesson about representation, because suddenly the planners were brought into the project, literally and figuratively. So since then, we've worked a lot with models, a lot with physical models. We like them because we see them as kind of conversation pieces. So you're not telling people in a way. Sometimes we make sometimes these 3D drawings, but only for competitions, really, because they're made to seduce. They aren't really made to communicate, and we're interested in communication between myself and Andrew and the people in the studio and our clients. And to us, that's very important, and has become more and more an impetus in the progress of every project. So I think the way you present the work is inextricably linked to how you engage with the world. It's something you tease out, because myself and Andrew, we started to work together, and it took us a while to learn how to work. Like, it took us 2 or 3 years before we understood, because we were trying to convince each other. He's very good at talking, I'm not so good. So I'd draw, he'd talk, and then we weren't sure if we were ever fully telling the truth, or some version of the truth. So actually, certain drawings like axonometrics and certain ways of making things like model making in different ways. There are ways through that conversation. So it's very important to us, yes. That's an interesting question. That's a hard question. The first thing I'd say is generally the work that we've made or built is quite small scale. So we're actually working in a small studio with maybe 2 or 3 people and myself and Andrew. So in that sense, the strategy is that we're all involved in every project, and there is a sense that the studio is communal and it's conversational. So the things I talked about as in a way of working is very important to how we develop the projects together. In terms of engaging in another capacity, I think it's interesting. We were taught in a school by people who really loved the subject, really good tutors, who made some important buildings in the city just before they started teaching us. And in a way, they taught us that no matter what scale you're operating at, that you should always be thinking about the city or thinking about the communal situation, that architecture is a social art. There's a great quote by the Ticinese architect Livio Vicini. Do you know him? You ever come across him? He's good. He's quite old now. He's very old now. But he says whenever you design a wall, whenever you design a step, whenever you design a door, you think about the city. So in a way, that's our saving grace, because for so long we've been in practice now for maybe 8 years, 9 years, and making small things mostly. And you might get frustrated if you didn't have a kind of bigger aspiration for the work. One of the first projects we did was tiny. It was basically a door in a church. And actually it was very interesting because we were very naive. Like we'd been working in a very big commercial practice. And so your engagement with craft, and especially local craftsmen and people making things, is very limited. I mean, you're really dealing with, really big factories making precast concrete, things like that. So when we got to make this, we were very surprised, actually, because the client wanted this glass door. She was recommending putting in, glass with patch fittings, that sort of thing, on like a shop door, really cheap, a bit nasty. And so we said, well, what if it was brass? Because the church had all these brass pieces of furniture and things like that. And we sent these drawings out to some metal workers that we'd never talked to. And actually, we found one which transpired that he'd done all the brass furniture, and his grandfather and his great-grandfather for the church, just by accident. And the funny thing about it was cheaper than the glass door with the patch fittings that came off the shelf. So for us, that was a real revelation, that actually you could engage with a scale of craftsmanship that wasn't industrialized or mechanized, that actually in some way there was a tradition still living that you could go to. And I think that's where the product stuff came from. So from that point on, then we were going, actually, we can make lights. It will be cheaper. We can make door handles, and we did so. And then so from that, then slowly we realized that we might make a chair. Or Andrew actually made a lamp because he had a lot of wedding presents that he hadn't given people. So he thought, well, I'll make a lamp. So that's where it started from, which was it was a moment in our practice that it was at the very beginning that changed a lot for us, that understanding.